Everybody says that reading is a good idea, but you're reading in Spanish and you don't really feel like you don't know exactly what it's doing, what reading is good for, if you really need reading. How do you even read well? Well, I've been teaching for 12 years and I have some opinions. Reading is the easiest way to get some input. Input is really important. Everybody thinks and talks about input. There's a reason for it. You see, with the stuff that you are learning in the language, there's basically three categories. The stuff that you already know and you can remember at any point. There's the stuff that you don't know, like stuff that you haven't learned yet. It's completely new to you. And then there's stuff in the middle. You see it somewhere, makes sense to you, someone says it to you, you can figure out what it is, but you actually can't remember to use it. You can't remember the word when you're actually talking. And input is really good for the three categories: watching stuff and reading stuff. But today we're talking about reading stuff. Why is it good? Because the stuff that you already know, you will be seeing again so that you're not gonna forget. That's the base that you already have to put stuff on. The stuff that you don't know, you want to acquire, you want to have exposure so that you can gather new information, can present new stuff for you to learn. And the ones in the middle, if you're presented with those repeatedly in a context, it's much easier for you to actually then remember them when you want to talk and use them, or when you want to write. You can recall them and use them like that. You haven't actually completely learned them yet. They're on the edge and we want to take them in, and input helps with that. So, okay, it's good, but how do I do it? The first thing is level. You need to find the right level for you. That is what we call the comprehensible input. A little bit challenging. Basically, it requires a little bit of effort for you, but it's not too challenging, because if something is too challenging, then you can't access it. You give yourself little helps and do a little bit of scaffolding to get to something, to access something. Some things you just can't access no matter what you do, or it's really hard to get to them, and that's too much friction. If there's too much friction between you and the exercise, that means it's really going to be hard to stick to it. And that's bad news, because we want something that you can get into a flow with. The state of flow only happens when you're engaging your mind, but you can flow with it. You know, there's an ease to it. Once you find the rhythm, you can get back to the habit again without too much friction. And this is really personal. If you know your level in the language, that will definitely help, because you can go for graded readings. You're still going to find some things harder than others. Sometimes it's not even that you find something harder, it's just that you find it less enjoyable, therefore a bit harder. But ideally, we would like to have some joy, find some joy in it. And this, I think, gets easier and easier, you know, the higher the level is, because you can access more authentic books, all types of books. Even books that you like in English, you can access a translation, which is, I think, one of the best ways to start, because you already know more or less what's gonna happen, but you're going into it still finding lots of new stuff. You're not completely lost. You can read in a very passive way, or you can read in a more active way. We want discipline, but we want the practice to be a little bit flexible so that it can bend with our lives, but it doesn't break. What does it mean if it's a bit more passive? Well, it may be that you have a couple options when you're reading and you go for an easier one. You're not pausing much because the lack of vocabulary is not really a blockage here to understand the plot. You're going a bit quicker. You're reading as a leisure activity when the level is very similar to yours, or you're really familiar with the text. But of course it can happen, and I think it's a great thing to have a book that is even comforting when you're tired, when you had a long day, you don't really have the bandwidth to do a proper exercise. In case it may not give you a lot of new stuff, but it gives you exposure and it gives you a habit and it gives you a way to maintain integrating the language into your life. And this is really priceless. So that is the most passive, which is a good exercise anyway, but it's more passive. So what makes reading more active, you may ask? You can create a whole weekly practice with this. Just take these ideas and adapt it. This is mostly about vocabulary, grammar, structures, right? The text is going to give you loads of examples, which is really good because that way you can consolidate the stuff that you know, and the new stuff, you can see it in context. Why is context so important? Repetition and context are two of the most important things when it comes to remembering stuff. Context gives it a sense. The context is especially important or useful if it makes sense to you, or if it's something that you may remember more. Maybe it was funny to you, maybe it reminded you of something, maybe it's a sentence that you can apply to your life or that you can rephrase, right? That you actually use maybe in class, maybe when you talk to natives in a language exchange, or if you're in Spain, anything that makes the context more relevant to you. So we know that context and repetition are two of the most important things when it comes to remembering. So what can we do with all of the new vocab, expressions, structures, grammar? But if you're pausing the book, you're pausing to look it up, write it down. I think it takes too long. I think you cannot get into any flow of any sort. So a good idea, if you have an ebook, a Kindle, is really easy because I think you can underline or select a word and you can even look it up really quickly. But if you have a paper book, you can have a post-it or a little paper that fits into the book, and and a little pen, a thin pen. And when you read in the book, no matter, you always keep it in the book, and you just write down the word and the page. You can even write down the line if it's has a lot of lines. But I think word and page is enough. If it's something that you really, really need to look up because otherwise you're not understanding and you can't move forward, you can do that. Right now, we have our phones around us all the time anyway. You can use word reference. That's the one I like. I really like that one. But most of the times, we actually don't need the word to keep on reading. Just put it aside, you write it down, word and page, and you move on. You keep going because you get into this flow, and that is like the first practice, the first time you're reading that page or pages, right? Well, at some point, you're going to go back, look up those words, and I would actually write the meaning on the opposite side, on the reverse of the paper. I would go back to the text. You have the word on the page. I would find them on the page, and I would see if I could recall the meaning because of the context. Remember, you have already looked it up, and ideally, just give yourself enough time to do that recall process, right? Because that's what we're training to do. It's better to leave a little bit of time, but not too much, because if you leave too much, you're not gonna remember. And we want to set yourself up for success. We want to set it up so that you might remember it. So yourself here. Some people have really good memory. You can go 2 days without doing this and you remember it. Most people, after an hour, they might not remember very well, or even 10 minutes. Look it up, go grab some water your plants or whatever, at least those 10 minutes, and then you come back. When you come back, you see it in context, and that should be enough for some of those words to come back to you. Some of them will pop into your head just by looking at the word and the sentence, and others won't. And you would have to, look at the reverse, look at the meaning, and be like, oh yeah, it makes sense in this context, right? And then you can go back to it and do that again another day, maybe the following day or the day after. Now, if this doesn't work for you, what I would do is I look it up, and immediately after, I see how it makes sense with that translation in the context. And then you can continue with the next step. Leave a few minutes, hours, a day, and then go back without the meaning, only the context. So, two options. Either you look it up, you leave a few minutes, hours, or day. You see it in the context on the page, and you try to remember what that was, and maybe the context gives it away now that it's in the back of your brain. Or if it doesn't work with even half of the words that you have, the new words, then look it up, see it in context, see the translation, how the meaning makes sense in that sentence, and then you leave a few minutes, hours, or even a day, and you look at the context alone without the meaning to see if you can remember. What this is a way to help you make that connection and remember the word with as little help as possible, but with a little help, right? We are trying to put a little bit of distance between you discovering it and then you remembering it, right? A little bit of time so that you can actually do the recalling, but you're helping it by leaving very, very little time between those two, or giving it that context. And of course, we're not doing this with many words, right? Like every time you sit down to read, you're not getting too many words. Maybe if you're getting too many words by page, is too high level to be reading, or maybe it's too technical, or maybe you're choosing a book that is too descriptive. You can find a lot of vocab that you don't actually want to have. Like if you read Harry Potter book, or any science fiction, fantasy book, or really descriptive book, you may get loads of noise in that. Or you may see all of those new words and just ignore them if you don't need them, or look them up and then ignore them. But many of the Harry Potter or science fiction, other science fiction and fantasy words, you know, they may not come in handy just yet. Okay, and now these words that now you're understanding, you can select the words that you think are going to be the most useful, because not every word that you find in a book is going to be useful. With those, you try to make up a sentence around it. This means putting your own context to it. They came in a context in the book. Now you're trying to create another context around it. Why is this so important? Because as I said, context is very important, and if it's relevant, it's even better. You need to test that you're able to use the word. Not just know what it means, but to use it in combination with other words. This is where ideally someone can correct you, right? Like it can be a native that you're talking to, it can be a teacher, it can be someone. Someone. It's even better if it's a person, you know? Even better if it's not a machine. Because what we're trying to test here is, I can put that into practice, and two, the subtle things, that word in a context but not in another. Maybe you got the meaning right, but it's a little bit too informal. Maybe it's used more with people than with objects. Maybe it sounds inappropriate, or it's something that you wouldn't use in that particular way, and someone needs to be able to explain this to you, to tell you why that works, right? You took something in, and now you're trying to put it into practice. You learn production by producing. You don't even have to always write these. I would say, for the ones that you're not sure, I would write it down and I would check them. But there will be other ones that maybe sit in that middle category. You kind of know what he meant, but now you're polishing your understanding of the word, but you don't really have a problem with knowing how to use it. Like the word doesn't have too much complexity in the meaning. It's easy, it's obvious once you know the translation. You already know that in these contexts it's going to work. I think talking out loud in the language is a really good thing to do, because one, you can do this type of thing really easily, really quickly. You need nothing, you just need your voice, and it takes less time because you're just, talking out loud. You can do it while you're doing other things. And I like the idea of talking out loud anyway, because it creates an understanding, a familiarity, and a self-awareness of your voice and how you speak and how you sound. It makes you a bit more independent. And this takes me to the next part, which is pronunciation and intonation. I think, as I said, talking out loud is really useful, and you can do this with the reading too. You can take a paragraph, a page. I think it's better to go for a page, like a couple paragraphs at least in a row, again, to get the flow. Once you have already read them, so once you know what it means, you know all of the words, so that you know what you're saying when you say it, you're familiar with the text, then saying it out loud, reading it out loud. And this is where you're practicing, on the one hand, the pronunciation of each word and that self-awareness. But as well as this, you can imagine you're reading it to someone. And just like if you were doing it in your language, you want to do the pauses and the right intonation so that not everything sounds the same. Intonation, give it flow, it goes up and down in different places. If you have an audiobook, amazing, then you can kind of compare, or if you have someone to do this with, or paying attention to how people talk and try to transfer that. But that's a little bit trickier sometimes to do on your own. But at least you can the muscles of your I was gonna say brain, the muscle of your mouth linked to your brain, and get familiar and used to pronouncing this language, because that's something that's going to help with your speaking. You can even record yourself, but because in this case you have no way to compare it, I would just focus on the feeling of pronouncing these words. And it will also help remember those words that we talked about. You're saying it in context, thinking about what it means. That's like an amazing repetition in a different way. And the last bit is, you can get as creative as you want with the reading. You can exploit it as much as you want. Talk about it. Talk about what you think about what that character did. How dare he did that thing? Or talk about what you think about the book, or what is happening, like a little diary of the book. Oh, well, today I read that John is going to do this. You can write a summary. You can write a review of the book. Prepare a few notes or vocab, or even rehearse to present this to someone else, to talk about the book with someone. Maybe you go to a language exchange or anything, and you can talk about the book, you can bring it up. You can find very different angles to work with the text. You can find examples of grammar you're working through to try to understand a little bit more. Go for the vocab a little bit more actively. Talk about it. You can talk about it by yourself. You can write about it. You can pronounce it loud. Just so many things. Because sometimes we just want to get a little easy activity and exposure from one angle only, or what is working lately, or what you have time for. And other times you can try to be a bit more curious or open about how you can play with it. Find a little bit of joy and find a way to exploit it. So try to find something that works for you today. But yeah, all in all, reading is an awesome activity. I hope this was helpful. Tell me what you're reading down in the comments. I will be really curious to see what you're reading and if you're liking it or if you're not liking it. And if you want a video about recommendations on books in Spanish, or what is best for each level, are normal books good? I don't know. If you have questions or ideas, I am happy to hear them. Yeah. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, give me a like if you liked it, and we'll see each other again soon. Hasta pronto. Ciao.